Hey there, friends, and welcome back to another 3-Minute Thoughts. My name is Derek, and for the next few minutes, we're going to open Scripture and discover that the stories God preserved thousands of years ago still speak to us today. Today, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, one chapter in the New Testament each morning. Paul does something interesting in this chapter. Instead of giving the Corinthians a brand new lesson, he takes them back to the wilderness, back to Israel's 40 years in the desert. Why? Because history can be one of the greatest teachers. If we're willing to learn from it, Paul reminds them that Israel had every spiritual advantage. They passed through the sea, they followed the cloud, they ate the manna God provided, they drank water that God miraculously supplied from the rock. In other words, they experienced God's presence, God's provision, God's miracles, and yet many of them still fell away. They gave themselves to idolatry, they pursued sexual immorality, they grumbled against God, they tested his patience. The issue wasn't that God had failed them. The issue was that they stopped trusting the God who had rescued them. Then Paul says something every believer needs to hear. These things happened as examples for us. The Bible is not just a record of what happened, it's a mirror. It's meant to help us recognize our own hearts before we repeat the same mistakes. That's why Paul gives this warning. Let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. Notice, he didn't say, if you feel weak, be careful. He says, if you feel strong. Because overconfidence is often more dangerous than weakness. When we think, I'd never do that, we've already lowered our guard. Scripture gives us example after example. David wasn't defeated by Goliath. He stumbled years later at the height of his success when he stopped paying attention. Peter confidently declared, even if everyone else falls away, I never will. And then a few hours later, he denied Jesus 3 times. Solomon was given extraordinary wisdom, yet his heart slowly drifted after other gods. The greatest danger wasn't ignorance. It was assuming they were beyond failure. But Paul doesn't leave us with only a warning. He gives one of the most comforting promises in the New Testament. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. That's good news. Your struggle is not unique. You're not the first person to wrestle with it, and you're not alone in it. Then Paul says, God will also provide the way of escape. Notice what he doesn't promise. He does not promise you'll never be tempted. He promises you'll never face temptation without his faithful presence. That's always a way out. Sometimes it's walking away from the conversation. Sometimes it's making the phone call. Sometimes it's shutting off the screen. Sometimes it's confessing before the temptation grows stronger. The way of escape may not always be easy, but it's always there. The question is whether we're paying attention enough to take it. Here's a thought to consider. Is there a temptation you quietly assumed that you're beyond? Confess it and rest in God's power. Be well, friends.